So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Bryan Smallwood. I use he, they pronouns. I'm a father and a husband, an associate professor and production manager at James Madison University. I'm also a co-owner of SafeMakers, a space, a company dedicated to bringing safety compliance to K through 12 schools. And I'd love to talk to you about that at some point later if you're interested. But for today, we're talking about incorporating codes and standards in education practices, and we're very, very fortunate to have 2/3 of a fantastic panel. I'm really excited about it. What I'd like to do is just have you both introduce yourselves, go through a little bit about what your position is, what brought you here, so that we can get the ball rolling, and we'll rub it in Bill's face that he couldn't do that for everyone at the same time. So, after you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Grabe, pronouns they, them. I am the executive director of ESTA, which is the Entertainment Services and Technology Association. Show of hands, how many people know what ESTA is or of ESTA? Okay, most of the people on this side of the room, that's great. Hopefully, by the end of the session, you'll have a little bit more understanding of ESTA. ESTA is a nonprofit 501c6 trade organization. And we have members who are businesses ranging from manufacturers to dealers to designers to consultants, et cetera. And ESTA administers the Technical Standards Program and the Entertainment Technician Certification Program, and I'll talk about those a little bit more later. My background is in lighting and technical production. I've been doing that since I was 15. It's pretty much all I've ever done. I started with ESTA about 13 years ago as the Assistant Technical Standards Manager for the Technical Standards Program, and I've been the Executive Director now for about 6 of those years.
Hi, everybody. Bryan Huneycutt, use he, him pronouns. I am the Vice President of Operations for a software company in the incident management, security management space called Halo Solutions. Also freelance with my own company called Honey Badger Entertainment Consulting, and have also started to put on the hat of being an instructor and educator with a couple of different universities. So my background is really from the performance world into all of the management parts and pieces of entertainment, and then moving into being in the space that I am now, which is mostly in event safety. I've served on the board of the United States Institute of Theater Technology, currently serving on the board of the Event Safety Alliance. That is probably a lesser-known organization. Glad to talk to everyone about that organization. I work with ESTA quite a bit because of that connection on codes and standards, how we create those, and currently chair the mental health working group is what I'm going to call it. That is not the official name for it, but for here, that will serve the best purposes. Spent most of my time, 25 years working for the Disney company, so everything that I reference has that somewhere in the foundation of the things that I do, but now my space is mostly with touring theater.
Thank you both very much. Appreciate this. One of the things that we sort of wanted to kick off with, whenever I start talking to people in the industry about codes and standards, I had this conversation literally yesterday with a colleague, and one of the conversations that comes up is, well, you know, how do we incorporate codes and standards given that it gets in the way of the process so much? Or the idea of, well, there's a choice between meeting the safety standards or getting it done, and sometimes you have to find the balance in between. And we were in our initial sessions talking about this as a pretty intense misnomer idea that seems a little far afield. Bryan, you were talking about how standards can be the scaffolding towards creativity. Yep. And I wonder if you would talk about that a little bit further, just
Sure.
flesh it out a little bit.
And I have my cheat notes right here, so if
fantastic.
I reference this, that's what's going on. So really, standards can be a scaffold to creativity. So often when we think about standards, when we think about the rules, everybody looks at them as, here's a book of things that's telling me what I can't do. And so really what we need to think about is that book is telling me how I can do these things. So much of the time we spend on, well, I want to do X. Sometimes we know how, sometimes we don't. The standards really give us a framework to lean on to enable that creativity. So when a lot of times when I'm talking about those things, especially dealing with a lot of the shows that I deal with, introducing them sometimes to standards. These are folks who've been in technical theater their entire careers, and maybe they don't know these standards exist. And so it's a way to kind of talk through, hey, there's this thing that if you're wondering if this is okay to do, this can help give you some guidance and let you know, okay, here's how we can do it. Here's the steps we can do. And often what that does, as far as the scaffolding to creativity, is it helps overcome the hesitancy of somebody spending the money on a specific type of material or a specific way of doing things or a specific engagement from an engineering standpoint. And so it really puts it on paper for the folks who need to see it on paper going, why are you saying we need to do this? It's not my opinion. Here's a code that is based on experts in the industry that are saying that this is one of the things that we should do around that.
Well, I really appreciate how you've pointed to the fact that the standards aren't something that's just happening to everybody from some outside source, right? They're growing from that experience. I mean, Erin, I know we're going to be talking about the process real quickly, but can you talk a little bit about how standards and engaging with the community sort of goes? Like, is it something where you're encountering a lot of people going, oh man, I don't want to engage with this because I don't want to be constrained? Or is it something that's a little more open? How does it work?
Well, I think like Bryan said, oftentimes when I'm having conversations with people, they don't know that the standards are out there. And I know that the title of this session is Incorporating Codes and Standards into the Curriculum, but we're also you're not going to leave here with a curriculum. Because as Rich said, like, we're all sort of figuring this out together. There really isn't a way to just like, here's a project, that you can incorporate that will teach you about standards. I think part of what our hope is in this session is that you all have a deeper understanding of the standards that are out there, because having a deeper understanding for the educators and the people who are doing the work will help teach. Will help teach the students and the younger generations about the standards that are out there and available. They are not coming from on high. They are developed by the industry experts, the subject matter experts from within the industry. We write our own standards, which is a great thing. You do not want the government stepping in to write standards for rigging. Things will not go well if that happens. They don't have the depth of knowledge that the industry veterans have in doing the work, and so we need those industry veterans to get together to write. Every standard solves a problem. Every standard is born from some problem that existed, and the standard gets written to solve that problem, save time, save money, often saving lives. It's unfortunate, but many of the standards we have were written in blood. They come from a place, a dark place where, something went horribly wrong, and the industry said, okay, this is a big problem. We can fix this. We can write a standard that helps to solve that problem.
Sort of that lessons learned element that we were talking about, the turning lessons into launch pads. Did you have something specific you want to touch on?
Well, and from that standpoint, looking at lessons that becoming that launch pad of the conversation, to lean on one of the standards that was recently published, parade standard was recently published. I spent many years in Disney doing parades, learned a whole lot of ways to do things well, learned a whole lot of ways to do things wrong. In this group, we had people representing like Disney, Universal, some of these large corporations that do standards with large budgets. We had folks from the Rose Bowl Parade, from Macy's, people that do gigantic productions. But the important thing about that standard is recognizing that we were writing the standard not for the companies with big budgets, not for the folks with all of the money and all of the expertise. We were writing this for the small town municipality that is doing their July 4th parade. They're doing the Possum Queen celebration. That is a thing that exists in the state of Florida. Look it up. It's fantastic. But all of these folks that may do a parade once a year, they may do a parade once in a blue moon. We wanted to give these folks some guidance to let them know, yes, you do need to talk about the distance between your parade units, be they built with flowers, be it a tractor, be it whatever these things are. We do need to talk about distances people should be from things. We do need to talk about how we can set up a route and talk about making suggestions like, Is it wise to throw things from moving parade units? If you throw candy in the streets, people will come to the streets to get the candy. Now we have people that are in the street. It could bring us to a whole crowd management, which there's a standard for that. So all of these different applications that come around are written by the folks who've made the mistakes. They're written by the folks who've been there, who've seen the accidents and who've seen those things. And they're written to give education and take those lessons and apply them further. And one of the things we're always thinking about is that scale and scope. We don't want standards to be restrictive to only the people who have budgets. We want to make sure that those standards are written in such a way that we can apply them at every level.
Well, and that notion, the next slide next point talking about creating a common language for collaboration. When I first read that and we talked about it, I thought about it in terms of our own field, right? The idea that, how many of us are educators real quick? Just throwing it up there. Okay. And how many of us have training programs in our professional practices? Yeah, seeing some of this. Okay. I find that within my own unit, there is often different opinions about codes and standards, right? Upper leadership in my organization seems to think that they just equal expensive, and that becomes a concern, right? But this notion that these codes and standards allow us to build a bridge to people that aren't in our field, I think is equally important. At SafeMakers, we talk a lot about drama teachers trying to coordinate through facilities teams who are responsible for getting these things done, and they have an expertise that isn't being paid attention to because, oh, they're just the drama teacher. But having a code or a standard that you can lean on and push now allows that sort of collaboration between divisions. Do you have other sort of thoughts on how codes and standards can facilitate communication?
I think that there's a number of ESTA's published standards that help bridge that gap, because it does have, there is a piece of paper that now says your rigging system must be inspected on an annual basis, and these are the points by which your rigging system needs to be inspected. Your rigging system needs to be inspected on a 5-year basis, and these are the points that you would hit on a 5-year review. And when educators and facility management are trying to get the money to pay for a rigging inspection, they can point to this document that says you must do this rigging inspection. If you don't do this rigging inspection, bad things can happen, and it's way cheaper to pay for the rigging inspection and the maintenance than it is to pay for a lawsuit.
Yeah. Being able to use those documents in that way and speak that language, a lot of the ways sometimes that I've seen folks successfully use the standards is to hand it to a different department and make that department an ally. If you're dealing with a space where maybe your facilities management team is in a different team, solving one of their problems, going, hey, I found this standard, this may be helpful to you, and enable them to be the one that came up with the idea. So often we'll use the codes to plant the seed, and then we'll use the other teams to then water it and come back. By these being written in such a way and being able to use the language of engineering or the language of rigging or the language of a specific thing based upon what the standards are. I referenced earlier that we have a mental health working group. One of the things we're working through right now is the ever-shifting language when we're talking about mental health and mental well-being, how the word trauma is looked at. So understanding what language we're using and what will be effective by the time the standard is published is the important piece, because that language may shift over time, and we need to be ready for how we move that shift.
If Bill were here, he touched on how heavily standards are incorporated into conversation across the board, because engineering is a whole different division that many people can't wrap their head around. And the idea of baking that into, like, this isn't just because I said so, right? I think is really clutch on that. I love when you started talking about how teaching the why unlocks innovation. I have a lot of creative folks that I've worked with over time who want to remove as many limitations as possible and just dream big and go big and what have you. And I find that there's often almost an inertia around it, because you've got all these options. And once you start applying limitations, things start to become a little bit more creative. is that sort of what you were pointing to with this regard? Like,
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, we are in a creative field.
Yeah.
And no matter what part of the field we look at, we have people who are very creative. They don't want to work in a box because that removes creativity. But haikus exist. And they're very rigid, they're very structured, and it forces people to be more creative to solve a problem because they're not taking the easy way out. So when we think about how we're teaching these things, if I give someone a rule, they're going to immediately go, well, why is it a rule? Why do I need to follow this rule? Why can I only drive this speed on this highway? I want to go faster. It seems like it would be smarter to go faster. It might even be safer to go faster in this space. So when we give people a set of rules, the first question they ask is, why do I need to follow this rule? If we teach from the standpoint of, here is a group of standards and these exist. One of the things that I often use is IKEA furniture. IKEA furniture comes with a lovely code and standard guidebook. If you follow it, you will probably have an easy time building the furniture. If you do not follow that guidebook, you will eventually build the furniture and then realize that that one piece is in backwards, and you'll have to take the entire damn thing apart to fix that one piece, all because we skipped the why. And so if we can kind of just step back into that commonality of just building furniture. You know, the book exists for a reason. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you frustration. You're going to build it correctly, and you probably won't have that one screw that goes in a little too far and then breaks the other stuff around it because you didn't follow the directions. And now you've got this broken thing that you're mad about and super gluing and putting together, not speaking from experience.
sounds remarkably specific, Bryan.
But yes, yeah. But it really is that, why do I need to follow the directions? And starting from that place of why really gives everybody an understanding of, oh, this isn't just an arbitrary list of rules that we have to follow. I often tell people, coming from the safety standpoint, is I'm never going to tell you no. I'm always going to say, yes, we can do it. Do we have the money? Do we have the time? The money and the time might tell you no, but I'm never going to tell you no. The code is going to do the same thing. It's going to say, here's how. Okay, it might be too expensive. Okay, you might not have the time to do it. You might not have the resources to do it. But this is the guidebook of how to get to the place you want. And I think that, and thinking about that mentality, makes us better problem solvers.
And I think that that many of the technical standards we publish, they might have a requirement in them that is, this is what the consensus body views is the right way to do something or the proper way to do something. But a lot of those standards also say, you can do your own risk assessment. If you don't want to use this requirement, do your own risk assessment and develop your own why. And I think that enables the creativity portion. It enables those people who don't want to be put in that box to say, okay, you can do it a different way, but make sure you do your risk assessment properly and evaluate all of the pieces that this standard says you should be considering when you come up with your own solution for how to do something.
Yeah, even the fall protection standard that OSHA uses, it defines specific structures, it defines specific weights, specific things, but then it also says you can also use an engineered system specifically for this purpose. So every standard usually has that, oh yeah, but then. But it forces us to look in the box first before we start looking outside.
Well, and I think a lot of folks who go into entertainment are creative problem solvers. And I think reaching out to codes and standards as a starting point it also saves you bandwidth, just in terms of your creative process. It helps you figure out where you could be focusing your energy rather than trying to recreate the wheel. So yeah, I appreciate these comments very much. In terms of, you have an expression where you say safety is the stage, not the sideline. Could you unpack that a little bit, please?
So my personal philosophy is, instead of safety first, I think of people first, safety always. Safety is a part of what we do. If we think of safety as a bolt on something, then it's never going to work properly. Safety is really encompassed in all of the parts of what we do. The ghost light is a piece of safety equipment at its core. So safety is part of the tradition of theater. We don't want people falling into the pit. So how do we solve that problem? We solved it creatively. There's the ghost light. And so it really is the space where we begin everything. If you're at a show and things look sketchy as an audience member, you're constantly worried the entire time. You can't really enjoy the moment because you're worried about that thing off to the side that looks sketchy. And so by doing things the right way, by doing things the way that is the safe way of doing things, we can allow the performers to feel safe, all of the technicians to feel safe, costuming folks to feel safe. Everybody is safe and comfortable in their environment. And if you make people safe and comfortable in their environment, they're going to do a better show. The audience is going to be more comfortable and more safe in that space. And just the psychological safety of everyone involved is going to let them really enjoy the moment. So that's really what that's all about, is by doing these things, we remove the barriers that keep people from enjoying the thing that we're creating.
Just on a personal note, it can also, I think, protect your organization. We at JMU were doing a production where our school mascot came up on stage and fell into the orchestra pit. But we had netting in place, so Duke Dog is fine. But I was teaching an OSHA class at Temple University, states away. Next morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I started talking about how this had happened, and they went, "Oh yeah, no, we know, we've seen it." And it was within 12 hours. It was like, okay, all right, good. Safety saved us some serious viral issues.
Yeah.
And not only saved the viral issues, that went from being, it could have been a tragedy, and it was turned into oh, look, no one was hurt because. Much like what we've seen, I'm sure everyone saw the Tomorrowland stage that went up in flames. They got that show going because of great partnerships. But the lesson with that is they were using testing the way that the standards say that you should do your continuity testing. They cleared the environment because of the testing that they were doing. And so when a fire started, it destroyed stuff. We can replace stuff.
Yeah.
We can't replace people. So in both of those cases, what could have been an absolute tragedy is actually a learning opportunity of that was a safe failure in that moment. And those are the ones that we want to learn from.
So Bryan mentioned the ghost light as a safety feature for, not falling off of a stage. Bryan also mentioned this, Duke Dog falling off of the stage. There is a standard called the Standard for the Prevention of Falls from Stages and Raised Theatrical Platforms, or something like that. It might be. We colloquially call it "Don't Fall Off the Stage." It's ANSI E1.42, I believe, and it's not really a normative standard. There aren't a lot of requirements. It's not very technical. It's good advice is all it is. And it's advice on, keeping people safe, keeping everybody safe. We always talk about, OSHA regulations, and we talk about standards. And the OSHA regulation for fall might say, like, you need a railing at 4 feet or something like that. And so people will say, well, I'll just build my platform to 3 feet and then it's fine. But you can get hurt on a 1 foot fall. You can get hurt on a 6-inch fall. How do you think about preventing injuries, preventing accidents from any raised performance platform? And how do you protect the people who don't have the ability to be trained in that space and in that particular environment? What if you have a stage door that the FedEx guy needs to go through to drop the package off in the office? How do you keep him safe? What if you're having an awards show where people don't have, you don't want to not everybody's going to practice coming up from their table and walking up to the stage. How do you keep those people safe who haven't had the luxury of rehearsing in that space? How do you keep people from falling off of the stage if there's, a children's chorus singing up there? Maybe just keep them 6 feet back. Maybe have spotters out in the front that have, their sole purpose is to rush up to the stage if some kid is coming too close. That's okay too. But there are different, there is a standard for not falling off of the stage. And certainly putting netting up is one great way to not prevent somebody from falling, but at least prevent them from getting hurt if they do fall.
Just to touch on, one of the things I've really appreciated in this panel so far is your advocacy for not just blindly following the standard, but thinking about what it means and moving sort of up from there. I'm an authorized OSHA outreach instructor, and when I was getting my certification or my authorization, I met an OSHA inspector who was getting his stuff done. And he said, if you follow all of OSHA's rules to the letter, you get a D in safety, because that is the bare minimum. That is what the government and big business could agree on. Like that is not there. So looking at that as a gold standard, I think instead of a starting point could be really dangerous. So I just wanted to uplift that I really appreciate that.
And with the OSHA, all of the OSHA things, one of the first questions they'll ask in their head is, who is getting a check? Mm-hmm. And in reality, if there were volunteers, then none of those codes apply. Mm-hmm. So really thinking, and that's why I love the phrase people first, because if we think about the people first and protect the people just because it's the right thing to do, all of the other legal hurdles that we need to overcome to do the right things, I can defend all of these decisions.
Yeah.
If I can sit and say, here's why we did this, here's why we did that. We leaned on this code for this, we leaned on this code for that. Heaven forbid something does happen. We have reason behind all of the decisions we made, and you're not alone on an island going, well, I thought it would be okay.
Yeah, OSHA regulations apply to the employer and employee relationship, and they are law because when OSHA publishes a regulation, every jurisdiction in the United States automatically adopts those codes into law. The standards that we publish and that we talk about, they're not law unless they've been referenced into law, but by their very nature, they're not law. They're what's called a voluntary consensus document. And if you are in the field and there are standards that are applicable to this thing that you're doing, there is no reason that you shouldn't be using those documents. If something goes wrong and God forbid somebody gets hurt or dies and there's an investigation, they're going to say, did you use this standard that's out there that offers up guidance for how to do this thing that could have prevented this accident? And if you're working in that space, you should be saying, yes, I did use that standard. And if something went wrong, then perhaps, the investigation will continue and you'll find out that, the accident happened for some other set of reasons. But if you don't know that the standard is out there, then the investigator is going to say, well, why didn't you use this document that could have prevented this accident?
Is it safe to say that it's effectively documenting recommended practice?
I mean, a standard can be a recommended practice. A standard could be completely normative with a lot of requirements in it. Or as I said, it could just be really good advice. But what makes it a standard is that the Technical Standards Program, ESTA, is accredited through ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute. And ANSI is the body that writes the standard for how to write standards.
Well, Erin, hang on. How are standards written? I'm just curious if you could set that.
Well played.
They really are. They have what are called ANSI's essential requirements, and ANSI's essential requirements say, if you want to write standards, here are the rules that you have to follow. ANSI doesn't actually care what the content is that you're writing, but they do care that you are following the recommended practice for how to publish an American National Standard, a voluntary consensus document. And that is, you get a group of people together. Do I press up or down?
The right button.
The right button. So you get a group of people together that are all subject matter experts in something. ANSI doesn't really care, like I said, what the subject matter is. As long as they are subject matter experts and they are materially affected by the intended work output of this document that the group is writing. So the group is, per ANSI's requirements, they're required to have a broad interest of users, and they're called interest categories. So you might have manufacturers, you might have designers, you might have users, you might have consultants, and all of these people would be materially affected by the work that you're trying to publish. And so they all, according to ANSI, have a right to be at the table and should be involved in the writing, so that you're not having just manufacturers writing some standard that is going to affect the end users. You want to have everybody at the table. And so the standards groups that we put together, we get experts in a room, they write a document, and they go back and forth about what it should be, and what, should it be a 8 times, design factor? Should it be a factor of 10? Should it be, 1/8-inch wire rope? Should it be a 1/4-inch wire rope? And they go through all of these things to get to sort of the minimum recommended way of doing this. And then when they feel like they're done with the work, it's good. We think it's ready to go out to public review. Public review is one of the required processes through ANSI's essential requirements. It must go out to public review, and we must publicize that it's out for public review. And the public gets to say whether they like the document or not. More often than not, they say they don't like it, and they're able to comment on whatever the specific language is that they don't like in the document, and offer up a suggestion for what they would like to see that portion of the document say. And all of those comments go back to the people that wrote it, and per ANSI's essential requirements, we are required to respond to every single comment we receive. We don't have to accept every comment we receive, but we have to thoughtfully, carefully consider the comment, and then tell the commenter, thanks but no thanks. The group of experts really don't agree with your comment, so we're going to reject your comment. Or they could say, yeah, that was a really good idea. I can't believe we forgot that, and we're going to incorporate it in whole. We will accept your comment. Thank you. Or we can say that we'll accept it in principle. Thank you for bringing your comment to us. That's a really great idea. We are going to take this to heart, and we're going to add it to the document, but in slightly different way than you recommended. We put it in there. And this whole process goes around and around and around a lot, like for a long time. Standards are not something that's quick. We've had documents go to public review 17 times. And those public reviews have to last a minimum of 45 days. And we have to have some advance notice to put the notice out there to ANSI. So you're talking really, it's like 60 days. And then the comments have to go back to the group, and they have to dissect all of the comments. I mean, we've had documents get, 200 comments, and the group has to carefully, thoughtfully consider all of those comments and respond appropriately. So finally, once this whole process is done, and we go out to public review and we get no comments back, we're good to go. Now we can take the document that's had subject matter expert input, it's had public input, everybody seems to be okay with it. Now we can submit it to ANSI. ANSI checks to make sure that we followed all of their rules about balanced interest of the group. We've gone through public review, we've responded to all of the comments, and they check all of the things that are in their requirements, and then if they give their thumbs up, then we publish them. And that's, in a nutshell, how standards are written in North America, or in the United States at least.
Would you mind, I know it's outside the scope of what we talked about, but if a standard was to be revised, how does that process work generally?
Sure. ANSI's essential requirements say that every published American National Standard needs to either be reaffirmed, revised, or withdrawn every 5 years. So when we publish a standard, we give it a birth date, and we put that birth date on the agenda for the working group that published that standard. And at every single working group meeting, we bring up that standard and say, does this need to be reaffirmed? Which means we like it. We don't think anything needs to change. We published it in 2012, but the advice and the content is still good. Nothing's changed. We can reaffirm that document from 2012. Or we can open it up for revision, which means technology has changed, the recommended practice has changed, something in the document needs to change, so we can open it up. And we can open it up anytime within that 5-year period if something really needs to be opened up. But the 5-year clock is really to make sure that things don't fall off the map, really.
And I think the revision process is really important, because one of the things we often forget is like when we open a show or when we start something, we'll document, document, document. Let's print it out, let's put it in a binder, let's put it in a folder, let's put it up somewhere, and then it sits there. So you don't want to print out a standard and go crazy and print all of the things out, make yourself a binder and go, these are my standards, because those standards are going to change. And so it's always important when you're thinking about the standards is to go directly to the website, which we will give at some point, I am certain, and check and make sure that the standard you are using is the most current version, because that is going to give you the most valid information that has been reaffirmed, that is in use. And if something were to happen, that's the one that was the expectation would be, it would be the latest guidance.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. tsp.esta.org is where you can get all of ESTA's published American National Standards. And we give them away for free so that people will use them. We used to charge $40 for them, and people thought that was too expensive sometimes. And sometimes people didn't want to spend $40, and then they download a standard, and it's really not quite the standard they were looking for or needed at the time, so they have to spend $40 to get another one. In the time that ESTA sold standards, I think it was probably, maybe nearly 20 years, we sold about 4,000 standards in 20 years. Since we've been giving them away for free, we've given away, I think, over $2.5 million worth of standards, because the point is to get people to use them. We don't write the standards to support our members. We don't write the standards to support just the constituents and the consensus bodies. We write the standards to improve safety overall and uplift the whole industry. And we have 11 of these working groups. I know Bryan mentioned the mental health and well-being management working group.
That's the word I missed, the management part.
Well-being management. But we have control protocols, which are, the standards like DMX and RDM and ACN and SACN and RDMNet and all of the other ones. That enable equipment to talk to each other. That's an American National Standard that we publish and maintain to support that work. We've got standards for electrical power. We've got standards for rigging, floors. We have a standard for the slipperiness of floors. How do you measure the slipperiness of floors? That's a really neat standard. There's like a DIY thing that you can build from the standard and like drag it across the floor and do some measurements and figure out how slippery your floor is. We've got standards for photometrics, like measuring the light output of an ellipsoidal on a planar surface. We've got standards for stage machinery and event safety. There's 11 of them. So there's a wide range of standards that are available on our website to do all of the things that we do as an industry.
So something I will share, a personal cheat code that I started doing when building a lot of the curriculum for some of the courses I'm teaching is, I may say a dirty word here and I will apologize in advance. I went to ChatGPT and I said, here's my problem that I'm trying to solve. Is there an ANSI standard related to this problem? It gave me lots of information, but the important thing it gave me is this is the standard that you want to look at. Here are some standards that would apply to this situation. I may have spent hours trying to figure that out. I consider myself a safety professional. These are things I deal with on a regular basis, but it is daunting the amount of information that is there. So by using that, it got me in the right place very quickly. What I will do with some of the courses, like I'm dealing with some crowd management issues in some of my event management courses. I'll take the crowd management standard and I will build a problem and I will ask them to use the standard to solve the problem. And so it's a great way to get folks into the space of A, go find the standard on the website. B, look through the standard to solve this problem. And it just gets folks thinking about, how do I use the standard effectively? How can I find it? Now that I've found it, I have a resource. I know how to go find it. I know where it is. And using those as tools to, create that memory of, oh, I have a problem. Here's a resource that might be the solution to my problem.
Yeah, and that sort of touches on a little bit of the point of the panel, which is, how do we incorporate this stuff into the classroom? you know, when I went to college, I studied under John Huntington at New York City College of Technology. And I had already known what ESTA was. I knew of ESTA and I knew of the technical standards program before that. Not well, but I knew of it. You know, one of his projects was go to tsp.esta.org, find a standard, post the name of your standard into Blackboard or whatever we were using so that nobody's doing the same one. Download it, they're free, and then answer these 5 questions about it. And it really gets people into the headspace of, you know, what is a standard? What is the point? How is it useful? And that's just like a really simple way of incorporating it into your classroom. Other ways you can do it are, we have a standard E1.2, which is on aluminum truss. That document has a lot of information in it. It's got some information that's valuable for manufacturers. It's got some information in it that's valuable for people designing systems with truss in them. It's got useful information for the users, and that might be one way to pick that portion of it out and say, here's what the user needs to know when dealing with truss. And when you get down to it, every standard also has like this little nugget that's like the thing that, oh my God, I didn't know that. E1.2, if you read it all the way through, it says when you buy your truss from the manufacturer, you're looking at the load rates, the load limits on this truss. You get the truss straight from the factory. It's in its nice cardboard packaging. It's pretty. It's shiny. It's never been used. You can load that truss to 100% of what the manufacturer says you can load it to. E1.2, the standard, says that as soon as you take that truss out of the air and you put it in your shop and you bring it back and you use it a second time, you have to derate it. That's the little nugget. Once you're using your truss more than once, you are technically, the recommended practice is to derate the load limits on your truss once it's been used.
That's really one of those circumstances. I know I was doing lunch with Rich and we were talking to one of his prize students, and he was talking about the value of when the students ask you something where now you need to go research, or when you start learning stuff because of what the students are doing. It sounds like that Huntington sort of exercise is a great opportunity to gain access to those nuggets and sort of share them broadly. Was that one of the outcomes of that, or?
Yeah, and then obviously we talked about it in class, and shared our findings. And, as in any classroom, you're going to get people that just go through and they answer the questions, and you're going to get people that are really thoughtful about how they answered the questions and do a great job. And yes, everybody gets to learn a little bit about all of those standards then, and where to get them. And as Bryan said, downloading them, I don't care if you download them 100 times, but do make sure you're using the latest version. Don't print it out and put it in the scene shop or in, backstage or in the office or whatever and use it forever. Go back and make sure that it's not been revised since you printed it out or since you saved it to your hard drive.
Yeah, from my consulting work, I'll do audits, and I'll often reference a standard as part of the audit, and I will add a link. Here's where you find this standard, so that, again, I can create that muscle memory for the folks. Even as basic as, hey, you had some fire doors propped open. Here's NFPA. Here's why. Here's why this is a problem. Again, getting back to that why. It's not because I said so. It's, here is what you are being tested to. Here's the rubric. If you've got the rubric, if you've got the syllabus, you can pass the test. So if you have all of the tools, it just makes things so much easier.
Yeah.
ESTA, Erin provided a couple of posters that I just want to share with everyone, but I couldn't integrate them into the slideshow, so I'm just going to bring them up real quick.
Yep. Yeah, we're posters.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you just walk us through what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so this is a fairly basic, standard outdoor stage setup. And we did our best to sort of show where all of the standards are applicable, and there's a lot of numbers and letters and stuff up there, and all of those names are really truncated, E1.46, number 10 there, the prevention of falls from stages. That's not the full standard name, but I got the number wrong earlier. I think I said 42. So the control protocols that are up in the air and the lights, the chain hoist. We've got a boatload of standards on chain hoist and how they're designed and how you select which one to use and how to use them. We've got standards for performing on a raked stage. We've got standards for automation and lifts and machinery control and things like that. We've got a standard for camera cranes. We've got a standard for how to keep video LED walls up in the air where they belong.
Well, and this was the outdoor version. You also had the indoor.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah, so an indoor version. A lot of them are the same, but we've got a standard for boom and bass assemblies. How many people in the room have worked on a boom and bass, pipe and bass? Pretty much everybody. How many of you knew there was a standard for? Okay, we've got one back there. Excellent. But this is a really great. It's a really great standard. This boom and bass standard. It's such a basic piece of equipment in a theater. You see this, steel base, and you thread a pipe into it, and you hang some stuff on it. Well, how do you make sure that you're hanging it properly? How do you make sure that it's not going to tip over? Well, the standard says try to tip it over. That's literally what it says. It says if you can apply pressure to one side of the pipe at, I think it's like a 12-degree or a 15-degree angle, and then let it go. Do a test. Make sure nobody's standing around. Make sure you're not using your most valuable equipment on it. But it'll tell you how to what the proportions of the pipe should be, where the weight should be located, and if you're unsure, try to tip it over. And if it tips, you did it wrong. But these are just two posters for trying to educate people on how many standards are out there and how applicable they are to pretty much every indoor and outdoor stage that's out there.
And these are great graphics also. Again, so many times when we're trying to get new equipment, get something replaced, we're fighting the finances. When we want to make safety improvements, we're fighting the finances. The sheer amount of information that is out there that can help you build those arguments and you can deliver to the folks who are going to think about the funding, those folks are also the people that will think about the litigation if something goes wrong. And if you can find these things, a lawyer can find these things. And so being able to say, here is the information that if we don't do this, will be used if something goes wrong. I hate to frame arguments in that way, but sometimes we need to be able to get those things through and apply pressure, not from you, but from the industry itself.
Well, and one of the things that I appreciated, you alluded to getting the number wrong by one, don't sweat it. But the idea that trying to remember the numbers and codes for these things can be daunting. I don't know if anyone has had a conversation with a sound professional before, but it can be a lot of numbers and letters thrown at you, and it can be a little confusing. I'm seeing some laughter, so I'm going to trust that's there. When we're talking about these, you talked about NFPA, OSHA, we're talking about ANSI, all these different strings of letters or numbers or what have you commonly have a meaning or some sort of method to them. I brought up the OSHA one here just as a kickoff for the idea that, the first four letting you know which set of standard you're in, and then it's just a roadmap about where to look. Because OSHA.gov is a free source and you can access these standards, this is sort of the roadmap to them. Do you have thoughts about the way that ESTA is organizing with ANSI, what have you? We have this example up here about how to read standards.
Sure. So if you go to tsp.esta.org/free standards, would get you directly to the published downloads page, or you can just click the download standards button from that homepage. There's a live search in the top, so if you kind of know the type of document you're looking for, you can just start typing into that live search bar. Like if you're just looking for rigging standards, or if you're looking for something specific. Our industry must really love acronyms because we use so many of them, and it is daunting. It is confusing. But the easiest way through it is to just do it more. Familiarize yourself with the standards and the codes that are out there. It doesn't matter if you don't know the the designation E1.42 or E1.2 or E1.6-4, like it really doesn't matter. But the more you do it, the better you will be at it. So when you go to the downloads page, the left column will have the designation and the name, and then it'll have the document scope, which is just going to be sort of in a nutshell what the document is about. The next column has the consensus body that developed that standard and then the date that it was last approved. If you were to search for almost any standard at this point, you'll see 4 or 5 or 6 different versions of that standard might come up. And only one of them will have the scope filled in. The others will say this document has been superseded. And that means that's an old document, but we still make them available because old standards are still referenced in other places. And sometimes they really do mean that version of it. And so we need to still allow people access to the older versions of it. But I would say if you're just starting out, start with the latest version. Don't bother with the older versions unless that's exactly what you're looking for and know that you're going to the page for that. And then you can click to the so every standard will have 10 pages of cover matter, which is all the same. It's going to have the title page, it's going to have who all the working group members were, it's going to have how the program, a little bit about the program and how it's funded, and then that is basically what a lot of our standards look like, and they're organized, by number, 1, 2, 3, and then we've got 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, and those can be up to 5 long. So you might have 6.2.3.2.1, right? Like some clause that's very specific in there, but that's just how they're organized.
Yeah.
And some standards are like I wouldn't necessarily recommend going and downloading DMX and trying to read that. That's really for manufacturers who are implementing a control protocol into their product. There are plenty of other places to learn how to use DMX and things like that. But there are other standards that are certainly good to read. There are standards like the don't fall off the stage. That's a really good one. That standard should be stapled to the front of every stage in the world, as far as I'm concerned. It's really good advice for keeping people safe up there. And then there's some standards, like I mentioned, E1.2, the trust standard, where you might read the whole thing, but the manufacturing section is not going to apply to you, and maybe the design section is not going to apply to you, but there will be a section just on how to use the truss.
I'd like to ask a sort of follow-up here. It's along this line. One of the things that I will commonly encounter is someone has done their due diligence and they go and they find a standard from some organization and they read it and they think they've got it, and so they interpret it on their own and go. And in some cases, the interpretation might be off, either because OSHA sometimes has letters of interpretation, or perhaps even the language. I'm thinking about the example of people say lifting chain can't be utilized in a rigging system, and they think that means it can't suspend things, but it's actually referring to running onto a system and actively lifting. How do you think people can protect themselves from misinterpreting standards, or what are the steps that you use to sort of make sure that you're following these correctly, or resources you use?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, when in doubt, ask questions.
Yeah.
One of the greatest things that I think we have in our industry is we are large enough that we have a huge number of subject matter experts, but we are small enough that we all know somebody that knows somebody. So if you have a question about your interpretation, check your thinking. Reach out to someone else, go, hey, I want you to read this and tell me what you think. How do you interpret that? And as with any good decision, don't front load them with what you think it is. Give them the information, give them the ability to come to the conclusion. If they come to the same conclusion, all right, you're probably in a pretty great space. But again, it's always check your thinking. With these standards, there's some incredibly specific information. There's a lot of them that I will read, and I will read the same sentence 9 times and come up with 9 different things that I think that it said, because that's not my space of expertise. So really finding somebody that has that expertise, reaching out, and if you can't find anybody, reach out to ESTA, reach out to the folks that we have that are subject matter experts, and you might have come up with a question that is unclear. And if you come up with a question that's unclear, then it's something we need to be aware of when we go to revise the standard.
Yeah, I agree. Exactly what Brian said. If you are unsure, or if you just want to talk through it and make sure that you arrived at the right conclusion from your interpretation. I told you the first 10 pages of this are cover matter, and there's, depending on the standard, anywhere from, 30 to 150 names at the front of every standard. If you know somebody on that list, call them up. Ask them what, they voted to approve the document as an American National Standard, call them up. If you don't know anybody on the consensus body, email the technical standards manager, email the senior technical standards manager, email me. And I can point you to somebody who can help you talk through the question or make sure that your interpretation was accurate. There are also, some groups out there, like some Facebook groups, where you could just drop the question in, and most of the people on there will have some form of an opinion on the question at hand. But that's a good way. Just talk to the people that wrote the document. They'll if they don't know the answer, they'll point you to somebody who does.
And on that base, that working group would be the place to start, right? That would be the roadmap of where to start asking.
Yeah, the cover matter starts with, I think, the technical standards manager contact information. So that'd be Richard Nix or Carl Ruling, and then underneath that, every working group has chair people that chair the working group, so their names will be listed there. I think their phone numbers and email addresses are right on there. And then the working group will be listed, but without contact information in the standard. So yes, I would start with, the chairperson of the working group or the secretariat for the SDO.
It's also a great way to find LinkedIn contacts. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to build your network of really smart people, here's a list.
Brian, when you're trying to do something similar with, say, the NFPA or with OSHA or anything, as a consultant, are there any steps that you take, or is it more networking?
It really comes down to the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Yep.
If you're learning correctly.
Preach.
So it really comes down to, I know I am not an expert when it comes to fire services. I know Dr. Don Cooper is an expert, so if I have a fire question, I have my list of people that I'm going to go to with my fire questions. So over time, you just kind of build that network of people, and as you collect these humans that are in your space, it's like, I know if I have an OSHA question, who I'm going to go to. I know if I have an NFPA fire question, I know who I'm going to go to. If I have a pyrotechnic question, who I'm going to go to. I know people more than I know things. And so that really gives me the ability to go, okay, here's a question I have about this. Let me make sure, from the consulting standpoint, I'm getting my client the best answer out there, not the answer I know. Mm-hmm. And so it really comes down to how we use that network. And everybody is 99.9% of the time perfectly willing to sit down and share their knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and not only in terms of engaging resources, I suppose, knowing your own locality, knowing your own authority, having jurisdiction, knowing your own sort of risk management division or anything along those lines.
Yeah, especially if you're looking to do, if you have, I'll just stay with NFPA and fire. If I am bringing in a fire marshal to do an inspection in a space, and I walk through and go, hey, based upon this part of the code, we made this decision. I have a question for you about that. I instantly move up from the knucklehead that is just doing this because it says that's what I have to do to get the permit, to someone who's putting thought into why behind that. So it moves that entire walkthrough from a gotcha moment to a, okay, you're trying to do the right thing. You missed this thing. Here, let me tell you why it's important. So walking in with that information sometimes can make that a much, much more educational space for both. Sure. And it creates that relationship as well.
I'm really glad you bring up educational space for both, because a lot of the folks who have the authority to look over what we're doing are not from our field. And there's a opportunity there, if you're building that relationship, to teach the other way. Incidentally, if you ever are inspected and need to explain a single purchase counterweight system to someone outside the field, just say it's like an elevator. It will click for them. Just personal experience. So
I always joke with people that I knew when I worked for Disney, I knew when the OSHA inspectors went on vacation because we would get a letter from OSHA about a unsafe fall protection practice because they watched a parade. And they'd go, she's at a dangerous height and she's going to fall. Well, she's harnessed in, you just can't see the harness. So they're looking at it from a perspective of what they know, and then it was always an opportunity of going, hey, let me show you how we created that harness. Let me show you how we created that positioning system that runs under her dress, that runs through the braid of her hair. You can see none of it. Here's how we inspect it every day. Here's how we make sure she can't even get to the edge. So here's why it's engineered this space. So it really becomes that opportunity, to your point, to educate. Here's how we made these decisions. What do you think? And so it then became a space of, our OSHA person knew, they got the phone call. It meant they got to come out and watch a parade. And it's like, Kevin, you're here. Come on. What do you want to see? And so it's a great relationship of how do we make this work?
it is easy to forget that civilians don't get on stage all the time. So yeah, very, very cool. Very cool. As sort of a teaser for our afternoon discussion, I wonder if, and this is, you don't have to be representing organizations on this can just be your thoughts. Let's say for the sake of discussion that you know that there is a safer way to do things, and you advocate for that, and folks who have money-making decisions or what have you don't agree or don't put the funding there. So you're in a situation where you're concerned, but you don't have the authority to get there. What is your ethical obligation in that? What are the knowing better, but not necessarily having that agency? What do you think is important for that individual to engage with?
I think the voice mainly is that if you
Go
watch
on The Voice, that's a great show.
Yeah, it is a great show. But speaking up,
Yeah.
making sure that you may not have the last decision, you may not have the ability to make the decision, but you do have a voice, and we should use that voice. If you've watched the Astroworld
Debacle.
documentary on Netflix, if you watch that, there's a point that really stood out to me on that, where one of the folks said, "I just want it on record," and it was a text message, and it was saying, "I want this on record. I want to say this out loud." And sometimes that's the only thing we can do, depending upon where you are in the hierarchy, depending upon where you are. And one of the reasons that I started working for the Halo company is that's a system that allows people to put things on record, that is an auditable platform, and it cannot be deleted. So it is a space that if someone raises a safety concern, here it is. We now have it. We were made aware of it. And so, if nothing else, you can at least sleep a little better knowing that I raised my hand, I raised this issue, and sometimes that's the most we can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that. I don't, you could go to your direct supervisor and they could say, no, we're not spending the money to fix that. You could say, well, I think it's a serious enough issue that I'm going to go to your supervisor, or I'm going to go above your head because this is a very dangerous situation we've created here. If it's something that, is not inherently going to cause loss of life, but maybe is just not really according to the recommended practice, I don't know how much you push for that, if it's something that isn't necessarily going to cause catastrophic failure. But as Bryan said, at least go on record, write a letter to the dean of the school, write a letter to the president of the school, or whatever situation you're at, write a letter to the owner of the company, if they're not paying attention, and get it on record that you don't agree with whatever they're doing. If you're being employed on a job site, it depends on what the issue at hand is, but you could call OSHA and say, hey, there's a very serious thing happening over here, and they'll send an inspector out. If you're on a job site that is not doing something according to a recommended practice that is creating a very dangerous situation, go on record and if need be, leave the job site. You know, I know that that's not always ideal when you're trying to make a living and make ends meet, but depending on how serious it is, you just may not want to be involved if that company's not doing things the right way.
Yeah, if you want to take a trip down conversations like that, another documentary on Netflix is about the Titan submersible. And it is an exploration in failed leadership. If you go through that, of the number of people that did raise their hands, the number of people that did say, I can't work in this organization because these things are going to happen. Sometimes we have those choices. Sometimes we're in a position we're not able to make that choice. Always, again, get it on the record. If you have a conversation with somebody, send them an email and say, hey, I just want to capture the notes from our conversation. And that way, again, it is in an email, it's on the record. If you feel it can come back to bite you, make sure that you forward said email back to yourself and make sure you kind of protect yourself in the ways that may be necessary. Nothing may come of it, but if something does, at least you're in a stronger position. And a piece of advice that I was given years ago is before you pick the sword to die on, count the bodies. And if it's a pile of bodies already on that sword, it's probably not the sword to die on. But again, make sure you raise the question and make sure that you're addressing those things. And again, life safety first is what our goal with all of this is.
I will never look at Pyramus and Thisbe the same way again. Just want to offer too that as we're talking about integrating these standards into our classes, being ready to engage with questions like that. It might not be as tangible as what's going on with the standard. It might just be, hey, what are we doing? What do you think with the students? I mean, that'd be a really interesting conversation right there.
I know you're in doctoral studies, and so many of us are not just instructors, we're students as well. And I always try to come from the standpoint of when I'm teaching is what is the unanswerable question? With the topic that I'm teaching, what is the thing that I can put out that there seems to be no answer? And put that out. Put that out to your students and let them struggle with it and let them try to come to terms with the thing. And when they say, I don't know, I can't figure it out. Okay, sometimes we can't figure it out. It's the thought process of going through figuring out the unanswerable question that is sometimes the most important lesson.
Well, I think that we've set some really fertile ground for conversation. What I'd like to do is take our remaining time and open it up to the group here, right? We've got some a lot to reflect on from our discussion, but we're also here with experts in front of us. So if there are questions or ideas or comments or thoughts about anything that we've heard today, things that we want fleshed out, anything that we might want to understand more before trying to bring stuff back to our own organizations, I think this is a time and space for that. And with that in mind, anything from the group at the moment? Yes, please.
This is a really silly question, but those posters from earlier, are they available as classroom resources?
How many of us were gonna ask that?
So those posters, we just finished them like a week ago. So I think what we will do is post them onto the website for download. If you want to, I can give you my business card or something and let you know when that happens if you send me an email.
And email addresses can be located on this slide as
Oh,
well.
yeah,
So if you need to send emails pertinent.
That is a great teaching tool to post somewhere in your facility because it's a conversation starter, not just with the folks that use your facility, but with the folks who may be passing through to see that and give them the understanding of, oh, there's a lot of stuff.
Yes, please.
I have a question for the panel, but also for the room, and it's pretty selfish, it's for my own edification. For those who study theater or teach theater, how many took an ethics class or teach an ethics class in the practice of the entertainment industry?
So the question was, for those of us who are teaching in the sort of theater world, how many of us took an ethics class and are using that to inform our pedagogy. Would you say that's correct? All right.
Bryan.
Oh, no, I was giving an example and Bryan legitimately did it. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, part of, I teach an event safety certificate course. Within that course, every one of the courses that I teach has an ethics component and ties back to why this subject, what are the ethics of this subject, what are the ethical challenges of this subject. Just me personally, I think that's always an important thing because it's part of the why. Why does this matter? Why do I care?
I appreciate that answer, because I think asking the question a different way, how many of you try to incorporate ethical conversations, there'd be more hands up, right? But I certainly do. I mean, there are cases that I recognize that I know do just because of who they are. But I think it's an interesting question. Is there a course about ethical practice in theater practice, and whether there needs to be?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of developing a course in ethical practice sounds really fruitful. One of the things I've noticed is that at least, maybe this is just my students, but there seems to be a lot of sort of excitement around practical hands-on applications. Am I going to pick up a brush and paint? And so engaging with that, I almost wonder if that's something that could be baked in across the curriculum. Because I think it's got legs in every class. I'm trying to think about all the classes I teach. I'm like, yep, it applies there, applies there, applies there.
It's kind of thinking about it from that standpoint. Safety and psychological safety go hand in hand. Psychological safety is part of ethics. So really to that point of, there should always be a safety connection to anything that we are teaching people to do, especially if it's hands-on. There has to be a psychological component to that as well with everything that we do to make it a safe space to learn in. So I think it's probably baked into so many of those things, but I think it's an interesting question of what would a course based on that look like?
I'm thinking back to Bill, who talked about how no matter what, they didn't have a dedicated codes and standards course. Every course had codes and standards baked in across the board. It seems like we're sort of getting in that neighborhood. I'm sorry, hint.
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay.
Finish your thought.
I think that was my thought, was just the idea of baking in across the board.
I think ending with the ethical question and going back to the practical application of, the exercises you did in your course, Erin, students respond when I can apply something, right? And I think students today even more want to have those empowerment and ethical conversations and why would I do this? Why is this important? At least in my experience, I'm finding with students today. They're willing to put in the effort if they understand why.
Yeah.
And I just think, just ending on that note, I think really sparked how going back to the incorporating standards into our classroom. It's a key discussion.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Yes, please.
So I may have to scaffold this a little bit. So I exist in a facility where I have a curriculum and 2 programs, and I'm in a touring house that has its own staff, its own budgets. We live there, but we're roommates. My students that I teach in the classroom then work for them under work study. So we've got both what the students are learning in the classroom may not translate fully to that house staff who are going to do it the way they do it. And then we also have the touring companies that come in and in their language. Who rules?
Go ahead.
No, please.
I think the important lesson there is the fact that it's different. I do a lot of work in the touring space, and one of the things we constantly step into is I have my touring crew. They're going to have the union crew that they're going to integrate with. There's a certain level of expectations that they walk in about the way that they do work. They're walking into somebody else's house every time they're doing the work. And so learning to balance those things of, I know this is the right way to do a thing, and I may be working with somebody who's not going to do it that way. learning that balance of how do I influence these people to think about it in a safer, better way without coming across as neener, I know more than you. So I think that's an important lesson in that. And it's less about the reality is it's less about who rules, because you'll get a different answer based upon who you talk to and who's paying who and all of that stuff. And that problem exists in the touring world in every single space those crews go into. So learning that straight away is such a valuable lesson. You're actually lucky that you have that opportunity.
Yeah, and I just wanted to tack on, I think you've said this beautifully, but we have a similar situation, and we do things in, I teach entirely undergrads, which means very little experience from the get-go. So we do things much more conservatively than they do in other organizations. But I think in many of the cases, we're actually still meeting the code. We're just doing it in different ways, and ours is perhaps a little bit more than the others. So really,
Technical term.
yeah, oh yeah, the mitts. So yeah, that might be another way to explore that too. And I also think I have found that when I engage my colleagues from across the office, and I say, hey, listen, I'm trying to teach them about this, and I know that you're all doing this. What is your rationale? I actually encourage them to engage in the process in a way that they hadn't. And there is one instance where they have said, well, that's just what we've done, and I don't know if we need to anymore. That was the one time. I've been there for a couple of years now, but still, hey, that's a victory, right? So maybe that's also opportunity too. It's sort of like training the others in the field, right?
I love that you said that, because that we've always done it this way is the most dangerous phrase you can ever hear. Because many times you're doing it that way because of a set of situations that existed at a time, and it's this legacy holdover that is not applicable anymore, but we're just still doing it. So asking the questions of, well, why? Well, do we have to? Sometimes no one's just challenged it because they haven't felt safe to challenge it or didn't think about challenging it. So asking that question is such an important question it's all about the why.
I was telling Rich about, we had a policy that we couldn't drink in front of students and at all, and they were serving wine at events. We couldn't figure out what was going on. If you want a hint that maybe this is the way we've always done it is at play, if you ask people why and you get a whole bunch of different answers and no one's got the same answer, that could be a hint that maybe that's going on. Just sharing that. Did I see a hand over here, or was it a camera? Do you have a question with the camera? Sorry.
And I would also say, in your situation, I guess depending on what the thing is, that's the difference. You could also sort of use it as an opportunity for teaching the touring company. Like, if the students are learning one way to do it, you can say in the contract, it could even say like, any chain motors you bring in must be, E1.6-4 compliant, or whatever, the designation is. Or if you're bringing in truss, it must meet E1.2 that has an inspection clause in it that says this is how we're going to inspect truss, and this is what we're inspecting, and this is how often we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to detail those tests. You could say, that truss and outside equipment and chain motors, meet the spec of the standard. And you could bake it into the contract, and that way also if something goes wrong and they say, oh yeah, we inspected it. Well, if something goes wrong, you could say we called out the standard. They were supposed to have inspected it and they didn't, and it had a crack and it broke, or a light fell off of it or whatever.
Thank you for that, man. Yes, please.
I really appreciate the comments about staying up to date on codes and standards because they change all the time. I was telling Bryan, we did a tour of our theater spaces earlier today. I had to open the fire curtain to open up the room. And I said I'd given a tour earlier this week, and someone said, I didn't know we had to do that, keep the fire curtain closed when the venue's not in operation. And I said, I know, I didn't know that until 5 years ago when I was surprised the same way, and now we've incorporated it into our practices. And so I guess my question is, there's a lot to keep up to date on all the time. And things change fairly often. Are there recommended approaches or techniques? What do you do? How do you stay up to speed? I try to read everything I can, but I know I can't. So like,
That's a loaded
I
question.
know it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's like trying to develop a strategic plan for a business, and we're gonna sit down and we're gonna talk about all these great things that we're gonna do over the next 5 years, and then that strategic plan gets put up on a shelf. Yay, we did it. But then what did we do? Then we did nothing. And, and there is no one answer, but certainly in our field, I think it's unfortunate that there is so much changeover and that institutional knowledge gets lost and historical knowledge gets lost. But trying to ensure and document what those things are, I think would be one way, like, creating a binder and bolting it to the wall, so that it can't go anywhere. But just as a reference point to say, maybe you don't have the standard in that binder, but maybe there's a few paragraphs or something that you took time, every now and then to do a few paragraphs on one standard at a time. But or a plaque. I mean, the fire curtain thing, ANSI E1.22, you can download it at tsp.esta.org. Put a plaque up or something up that says, this fire curtain shall be used and operated per this thing, and, put the URL on a Post-it note and, gaff tape it to the wall.
I know that OSHA commonly sends out sort of newsletters like quick takes and things, but it's not focused in the same way on like standard updates. So what I have done, now I have access to an OSHA Training Institute as an instructor, but that means you've got them in your regions too. They are required to send us updates in at least the OSHA code and things that have changed there. So if you're looking for that kind of shift, that might be a resource because they have to tell their trainers anyway. So each region has their own OTI. You could hit them up and say, hey, what are the updates for this year? Most often the one that they talk about is the fees have gone up for the different violations, but still there's other sort of elements as well. Does ESTA have something like that, an update sort of summary anywhere? Or is it really go to the source and see the ones that have been crossed out and that's sort of the update? Because that is a very telling way that it has been updated.
That's a good question. I mean, we do publish twice a month. We publish something called Standards Watch, which is one of the driest things you would ever be able to read in your life. But the hierarchy of things that get posted in Standards Watch are, firstly, the headline, the headliners in each issue are anything that ESTA has done. So if a new document's been published, or a new document's been revised, or a document's been withdrawn for one reason or another, those are sort of the first things. And then the rest of the document is standards from everywhere else in the world.
Wow.
That may have some bearing on this industry. And this document comes out twice a month. Technically, you're supposed to be a part of the technical standards program to receive that document. And everybody in this room, I think, is qualified and certainly eligible to sit on any of these working groups. You can join any of the working groups as an observer, and that simply means that you'll get an email with updates for whatever working group it is that you joined, and you'll start getting Standards Watch, and you can check out, at least the first page or the second page where it's got the stuff that would be really applicable to you. I mean, some of the other stuff we post in there is like, the standard for the tensile strength of something changed, and some manufacturer might want to know about that. Mm-hmm. Right, that's not necessarily the type of thing that everybody would be reading with their morning coffee, but we do post that stuff in there so that we can say, that we've informed the industry as to the standards that are changing, not the ones that we write, but the standard. I mean, we look up standards in China, we look up standards in Australia, we look up standards everywhere, and we post this thing twice a month because usually there's some sort of action item that has to happen with it. There's like, hey, this document is out for public review and it's only in public review for the next 30 days or something. So we've got to that's why it goes out twice a month, because those windows close pretty quickly.
Absolutely. So, Rich, coming back to something that you said, I want to share something that was ingenious that one of my tours is doing. Only one of them has picked up on this. As part of their safety road box, there's a QR code to the standards. And so it literally is here's a quick way to get to these so they don't have the printed folder that gets forgotten. So there's that. And also, when we think about integrating these things into curriculum, if we have standards integrated into curriculum, if we're sending students to a place where they're working on an assignment related to standards, then we're creating the muscle memory for them. And we're also bringing it back around for ourselves, because that means they're accessing the latest version, and they may discover something that we didn't know was included in that latest version. So, using that integration gives us all the benefit of how do we stay up to date? How do we connect those? And I'm now waiting for the ESTA TikTok page with those updates, because, that's.
I mean, you're giving me
that's
some
the-
ideas.
that's the
And also, I mean, to Rich's question, I mean, something as simple as a sheet posted near everything that needs to be inspected and when it was last inspected, and like the little thing that says this must be inspected every year, and then I mean, they do it for bathrooms, right? This bathroom was last cleaned 5 hours ago or whatever. You can post that type of thing in your space as well, and at least have some record of, when the last time it was inspected, and then, and maybe a QR code. Maybe we should be making QR codes available that people can post around their space. Unfortunately, we can't necessarily QR code direct to a single document. The QR code would only go to the whole page where you would download, the standard. But you could certainly put a QR code and then the name of the standard that's applicable in that environment around your space.
As a quick follow-up, is it okay to feel overwhelmed by trying to keep up? I think
Yes.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't try to keep up, just try to stay aware. I think is the learning for all of those. You're never going to remember all of these. You're never going to one of the things I mentioned earlier is I use ChatGPT to find it quickly, because there's so much out there and it's so incredibly daunting. I have worked on many of these standards, and I can tell you something that I worked on 6 months ago. I can't tell you what's in the standard anymore, because there's so much and it is so overwhelming and so daunting. And that's the reason we write it down, so that it stays there. Really, all we need to know is where to find it. So when we have those questions, go back and find it there.
And I'm glad that you bring up the notion that it can be daunting to stay caught up. I think I was thinking about how much I need to delegate, right? Like there are things that I personally don't need to know, but my costume shop supervisor does. And so where is my personal responsibility? What should I be keeping up on versus how do I just make it clear that we're all going to try and keep up on these other elements that way? So I think that's important. And I think the other element, and I think that you both sort of inspired this comment, is the idea of like, I don't have to be immediately correct about all of it, right? I need to be doing the work. When you gave the example of talking to someone and saying, this is what our rationale was around this, what do you think? That doesn't say, and I'm right? That says, I'm asking. And so showing ourselves a little grace as we try to do the right thing is probably just as important as we're trying to do the right thing. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, please.
The most success I've found we've had with like people that are very confident with standards in the office is they're usually a specialist in one part. Like we got the fire curtain guy who knows everything about fire curtains and stays up to date whenever there's an update. He trains the whole department on the new update and what's coming. So just getting ideas of like, how can I get the newer people on our team, like assign them a certain standard to be able to keep up to date with, and even for students too, like if you come in as a freshman or cohort, maybe spread those standards out, and then they have an opportunity for ownership of like being the person that their peers can come to ask about a standard. So if you czar of this. Yeah, exactly. Like this is the person that knows about the next. So being able to break it up really helps with some of that daunting stuff. Because yeah, I look at the pages of standards too, and I'm like, holy cow, how am I going to learn all this? Well, if I can focus on my bit and know who to go to for the other stuff, that can break it down.
It can also be a great opportunity to hire safety consultants to come in and assist with your organization.
And also, ESTA publishes a quarterly journal called Protocol, and if you don't receive that, I would highly recommend, you can sign up for a free subscription, digital subscription, or for $20 a year, you can get a print copy mailed to your house. But oftentimes, when we do have new published standards, there's usually a pretty big article that goes along with the publication of that standard that talks about why it came to be, how it came to be, what the reason was that the standard was written, and maybe talks like about those nuggets that I mentioned earlier, which is here's the key piece of why this was done and what you should be paying attention to in that. And the archives of protocol are all available online as well, because for the most part, the information is still relevant. So you can go and search articles on any standard that you're looking to get more information on. There's probably an article about it. And we're also working on some other ways, like these posters are, one thing that we can offer that are, helpful at pointing people to what standards are applicable in the environment. I'm also rattling around an idea in my head of maybe doing some sort of like podcast even that just talks about, in plain language, why did this standard come to be, who wrote it, what was the point, and have that be sort of a companion piece that people could at least listen to find out if that's the standard that they need or if they need more in-depth knowledge. And also personally, I would like to see some of the people who've been the driving forces behind some of the standards that we've written, have them on record saying their piece, because there's a number of standards that we have published who the primary driving force is no longer on this earth, and so capturing some of that historical knowledge from the people that were the veterans, I think, is also kind of important. So hopefully we'll be able to. ESTA is a really small staff of 10. And so adding a podcast production to our list of things is like kind of daunting, but I think it's really valuable, and I think it would be important. And I'm seeing a lot of heads around the room saying, yeah, that might be really cool, and that would be some way that without digging through the protocol archives or something like that, that you could, get some valuable plain language advice on a standard.
In our last 2 minutes here, I just want to remind everyone that we have contact info up here if you want to take pictures before we leave.
Or anything.
What was that?
We should have sat that way.
Oh, yeah, no, that's true. No, just kidding.
You wouldn't have been here, you would have been sitting this way.
But I also just want to ask if you have any last sort of like word of advice to the group, last takeaway. Here's the one sentence. I said it before. I want to make sure you hear it again.
I think one of the thoughts that has occurred to me as we've talking about this is how daunting this can be. A lot of the event safety standards that are out there are an easy entry into some of the standards because they are incredibly overarching, and they're talking about live event safety, and they're talking about it typically in some very general terms to begin with. So dipping your toe into some of the event safety standards can be a great way to do that and to start to absorb them, to get used to how those things are written. I think the most important thing we've talked about is just how we can lean on one another and how we can use this information, lean on ourselves, lean on the industry, and lean on the students as well, with what they can find and what they can teach us. Because if there's anything I've learned recently, it's how really, really incredibly smart and how gifted so many of the folks that I'm working with in these programs are. And they will find something, they will find a question, and they will hold on to it with tenacity until they find the answer. And I learn as much from those as I do from anything else. And my last statement, as I go on, is we've talked a lot about safety experts, and we've talked a lot about subject matter experts. And don't doubt that you are one of those, because there's so much value that everyone brings to the table, being part of the working groups. I've sat in rooms where it felt like I didn't know what the hell was going on because of some of the terms and language that those folks were using talking about things. But at some point I raised my hand and went, hey, I'm lost. And just by raising my hand and going, hey, I'm lost, made them realize that they were so far into the weeds that that statement or that phrase might not be usable. So sometimes that can be as valuable as anything else.
Erin, any last comments?
My last comment would be, I said it a little bit earlier, ESTA does what it does for the greater good of the industry, but we cannot and do not do these things alone. We do them with you. So that's my invitation for everybody in the room to become involved. Your entire university can join ESTA as a member for like $350 a year or something like that. And that gets you a newsletter that will tell you, hey, new standards are published or new standards are being revised. Subscribe to Protocol, free digital subscription. 4 times a year, you'll get an email that says it's live and you can go check it out online. Join one of the Technical Standards Program working groups. It's $150 per year. But that's to join one working group or all 11 at the same time. You can join as many of those groups as you like and be an observer member. Observer members are encouraged to participate the same way that voting members are. But it at least gets your name on the list and you'll start getting emails that's, maybe documents are being passed around for discussion within the working group. You'll start to see those. You'll start to see notification of meetings that are happening and things like that. So get involved. Membership is our membership dollars are what we use to support the other things that we do. So join up, get involved.
And hopefully you'll get more access to our panelists in the afternoon session. Can we give it up real quick for our panelists? Thank you so much. Nicely done. Feel free to grab drinks and food from across the hall before we get started with our afternoon's materials. So thank you.
Hey,
Nicely done. No, great job.
Good job.